So we have a full slate today, so I'm going to jump right into it. Our first speaker is Ross Farris. So Ross is joining us from Windmill Developments, and Ross is going to be discussing Windmill's One Planet Living, and the name of his presentation, Strategies and Challenges for Low Carbon Implementation. Ross has been advising municipalities, institutions, and private developers at both the building and community scale across North America on sustainable development for over 13 years. He brings a multifaceted perspective with sustainability consulting, mechanical and energy engineering, architectural and construction experience. As a senior development manager at Windmill, Ross manages the full development process for several new developments across Ontario, from early due diligence and concept design through to construction, ensuring Windmill's carbon commitments are always front of mind and never compromised. Ross holds a master's degree and a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Engineering with an emphasis in building environmental systems, both from University of Kansas. He's a registered mechanical engineer in the state of California and an ASHRAE certified building energy modeling professional. Please help me welcome Ross Farris.
Hi, everybody. Okay, well, how's everybody doing this morning? Pretty good? A couple good? Okay, that's awesome. The purpose of my presentation today is I'm really trying to give you a bit of just a lens of how the developers are approaching this, specifically how Windmill is. I think we've been after it for some time, but how are we going to get to carbon neutrality for our buildings? Try to give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. But before I get into that, I did just kind of want to take a poll for the audience and just try to understand who's in the room. So just by show of hands, how many are affiliated with Carleton, either through Sims as a student, professor, or something else within the academia world? Couple, okay. Architects? Okay, we've got one. Engineers, handful of engineers, all right. Good. People within city government. All right. Federal government. Okay. Contractors. Nobody on the building side, on the actual construction side. Okay. Anybody else that I've missed along the way? No. Okay. Well, the industry's vast, and I think that the important part of that is just we want to make sure that all sides are talking, right? If we're going to achieve these lofty goals, it's important that everybody understands, everybody's on the same page, and it's important to do that through some form of an integrated process as you are working towards these goals. So whether you're doing a full, IPD model through, your contractual model or something else, I think it's very important that all sides are understanding of the goals and are on board with those ideas. So my bio was just read, but I give you a little bit more information about myself. So I was born not in Canada. I was born in the States. I was born in Oklahoma, and I went to school at the University of Kansas, as was previously mentioned. And when I graduated with my master's, most of the folks that I graduated with were moving on to engineering firms, where a lot of them were just kind of designing some of the big box buildings in the Midwest. And I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to move out to one of the coasts where more innovation was happening in design. So I took myself out to California, spent about 10 years out there, where I started working with a consulting engineering firm. I ran an energy group for kind of the Bay Area within a larger multidisciplinary engineering firm. Did that for a number of years and then wanted to see another side of the industry. So I made a switch and started working for a design build contractor, started their engineering group in San Francisco as a mechanical engineer. So, got some experience on the design side as well as the actual construction side. While I was there, as mentioned, I did acquire my building energy modeling professional certification, as well as a professional engineer in mechanical engineering. And one thing that wasn't mentioned is I did also assist with the authoring of ASHRAE Standard 209, which is the building energy modeling simulation aided design. So basically not telling you how to construct an energy model the same way that ASHRAE Standard 90.1 does, but more so how you want to incorporate it into the design process. After a good 10 years there, and during that time I had met my wife, we decided we were over San Francisco, ready to move on. And we actually chose Ottawa specifically, not for a job, but not just for the climate, but we did want real seasons in our life, and we decided Ottawa was the place to be. So we chose Ottawa, and then we started looking for jobs, and we moved here in 2018 and have never looked back. We absolutely love it. It's been fantastic. I actually literally just got an email yesterday that I'm now eligible for my citizenship test. So I'm very excited about that. So I can hopefully be a dual citizen in no time. But anyway, I've been here since 2018. You'll see on the next slide, I started full-time with Urban Equation, which is within the Windmill group of companies, and I've slowly migrated over to Windmill. So just in general, Windmill itself is, we're kind of an umbrella, a group of companies. On the left-hand side here, you'll see that we have Urban Equation, which is our consulting arm. We do, we're impact advisors, where we do kind of sustainability advisory work for windmill projects, as well as for other developers, municipalities, things of that nature. We also provide development advisory services, where if an entity, doesn't have development expertise in-house, they might hire us to be more like their owner's representative to help them through that process. That's kind of where I started. Then we've got Windmill in the middle there as kind of the pure play developer. And then on the right-hand side is the OPL fund, which is a fund that we created in partnership with Epic Investments out of Toronto over the last few years. And the important thing about that is that's really what's driving our projects now. And so I'll go ahead and jump onto the next slide. The thing that we have done with this is the investors that have invested in the OPL fund are all of a similar mindset, right? They want highly sustainable projects. And so we start with that as a mandate for us. We use One Planet Living as the framework for that. One Planet Living, for those of you who don't know, is really kind of a holistic goal of trying to get our developments to work within the resources that we have on just this one planet. If you don't know, most of us in North America are consuming resources at a pace that would take 4 to 5 planets. And we obviously don't have that. We've just got the one. So that's what we're trying to work towards. There are 10 principles. It really does take this kind of holistic approach. So everything from health and happiness, land and nature, sustainable water, all the way down to zero carbon energy, you can see at the bottom there. So that is one of the 10 principles that we adhere to. And that's obviously why I'm here today, is to talk to you about the zero carbon energy. So the way, if you try to look at the way that we're attacking our projects, we use the sustainability framework of One Planet Living, but within that, there's obviously a lot more that we're trying to do. So we've developed over the last several years what we call the Windmill Impact Standard. It's intentionally not able to be read here because this is only 2 or 3 pages of like a 20-page document of all of the different line items that we're looking for in a specific project that relate to these 10 principles. And they encompass things from One Planet Living, from LEED, from the Ottawa High Performance Development Standard, specifically targeting Tier 2, Toronto Green Standard, because we are working both in Ottawa and in the GTA, as well as the Zero Carbon Standard. So, we use this column in the middle here, the Windmill Impact Standard, as kind of our checks and balances to make sure that we're able to get to the levels of certification and/or endorsement that we need, and that not only that Windmill needs, but also that our investors are demanding as well. So there's several tools that we have found very helpful in doing this. If you're taking the Windmill Impact Standard across the top, there's several things that go into that, right? Like there's a due diligence checklist that Windmill will look to for any potential development that we want to do. We have to make sure not only does it make financial sense, but also is it actually a development site that would work well with the sustainability goals that we have in mind. Because if it's not going to, it's kind of a non-starter. There are plenty of applicable projects or developments out there, and we want to make sure that we're finding the ones that are going to work for us from the beginning. So our due diligence checklist is not only does it make financial sense, are we able to get the right amount of square footage, et cetera, but also are we actually picking a spot that's going to somehow enhance the community, as well as lend itself well to creating a zero carbon or carbon neutral development, amongst a bunch of other things. We've also developed in-house some sustainable design guidelines and specifications that we provide to the design team. So, there's a whole set of specifications that an architect is going to need to develop for a project. We've done some of the legwork for that specific to the sustainability lens. So when it comes to materials, as an example, like that's a big one for us. So we've developed those in-house that we'll provide to the design team. We have the same thing for our construction teams as well. So mostly along the lines of the way that they're approaching their construction management plans. We're trying to do as much of the legwork up front as we can to make their jobs a little bit easier along the way. We then take that all the way into the operations. To date, all the Windmill developments have been for sale condo. We are looking at more and more rental opportunities as well. So that has a different, we have to look at that in a slightly different way, because we're in a condo. Basically, the owner is there for the first year after occupancy, and after that, it's kind of onto the condo board to do whatever they need to do. We do as much as we can to help them set it up. So the sustainable operations plan on a condo board is to help them understand all of the features of the building, make sure that they are using them to their best advantage, and same in the rental market, but a little bit, with a little bit longer lens, I'll say. So yeah, and then across the bottom, this OPL scorecard is kind of similar to like a LEED scorecard, but it's really more of the Windmill impact standard, but just a more encompassing process. Sorry, one second. With regard to zero carbon specifically, we have one project right now that we'll be pursuing and is on track to achieve zero carbon certification through CAGBC's zero carbon building standard. Because all of our projects are also going through One Planet Living endorsement, we have worked very closely with Bioregional, who's the group that oversees the One Planet Living framework, to help them create a Canadian standard for their process that is developed largely from the zero carbon standard, but layering in their own set of requirements as well. So as an example, the zero carbon building standard will still allow in certain situations on-site combustion. The Bioregional, the One Planet Living one does not. So, we know now that all of our buildings are going to have to start from an all-electric perspective. So, that sets the bar high, but it's much more helpful to know that up front than to try to make that decision halfway through the process of designing your building. Internal to Windmill, we also kind of have a carbon working group. I'm leading that on the Windmill side. Urban Equation is also assisting with that process. We're meeting on a regular basis and just trying to help further our tools. A few of the things that we're doing right now, we have engaged some of our energy modeling partners. We're trying to work towards getting a set of modeling parameters created, what we're calling our archetype energy modeling, where we're basically looking at all sorts of buildings, mid-rise buildings to high-rise in different climates, using basically everything you see on the right. This is kind of our TEDI study, TEDI being the thermal energy demand intensity. So looking at all the different envelope components, as well as a few different HVAC systems, so that we don't need to build a full-blown energy model at the beginning of schematic design specific to that building. We can come with the knowledge that we have from this previous study to say, we know we're in Ottawa, or we know we're in Scarborough or York or wherever, and we know that we have a 10-story building. We know we want to have high glazing on one side for whatever reason or another. So what else do we need to do to try to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success from a demand reduction perspective, essentially. So that's one of the bigger initiatives that we're working on at the moment. As well, we are trying to create some more documentation that helps when we are procuring our design teams. So we send out a copy of the Windmill Impact Standard when we go out to RFP for all of our consultants, but as well, we're trying to create more tailored inserts for each specific discipline to make sure that they are on board with the concepts that we are trying to pursue, and make sure that they are, equally as excited about this as we are. It doesn't work when it's just, the owner trying to tell the rest of the design team, this is what we need to do. We need somebody that's at the table that is equally as excited about that. And I can say that, on all the projects that I'm working on, that's certainly the case. So, a few other things that we are trying to work on. So every project we do start with geothermal as our basis of design. So we're almost certain that we're going to try to do geothermal for our heating and cooling systems on all buildings. There are a handful of buildings that won't work for. I'll get into one in just a moment. This is actually a picture of a building that we were just drilled. This picture was taken maybe 2 weeks ago in Toronto for a building that's just kind of starting construction, a mid-rise 8-story building. But the purpose of that is we know that we're starting with an efficient HVAC system. We are then having to do a little bit less in the building. It eases the pressure a little bit. The other nice thing about geothermal systems, the way that we are approaching this is looking at the delivery method of that. So we are working with a provider that does design, build, and operate. So from a financial standpoint, that works well because we're able to provide this system to the future owners of a building at a neutral or less cost than they would have from a conventionally heated and cooled building. The capital required to put the infrastructure in the ground is amortized over 30 years. So we enter into typically a 30-year contract with that provider, which then gets kind of ported over to the condo board if it's a condo building, as an example. But again, it's essentially cost neutral to them. The capital to do the infrastructure is taken off of, the burden is no longer on us as the builder to do that. So it's kind of a win-win from that perspective as well. So that's certainly something that we strive for whenever we can, which is the majority of our projects. I did just throw this slide in kind of at the last minute because while today we're talking about carbon neutrality, and I think the majority of the focus is really on operational carbon, that's certainly not the only picture, and that's not the only thing that's front of mind for us. We are very focused on operational as well as embodied carbon, and the embodied carbon piece is huge, right? Like if you think about the lifespan of a building, you have to think about all the materials that are going into that, and there's a story behind all of that. It starts all the way from the extraction of the raw materials, all the way through the manufacturing process. And then the use is just that one little piece in the middle, and then you demolish, hopefully in 100+ years from the time that building is built, and then, into landfill or recycle. So the embodied carbon story is big. We're looking at that on all of our projects. We have one in construction in Ottawa right now that's using the EcoPact brand concrete. So we're looking at a lower carbon solution on concrete. We're exploring mass timber on several projects. I've got 2 in Ottawa right now, as well as a handful in Toronto that we're looking at mass timber for. We're starting to do more, we are doing life cycle assessments on all of our projects. We're just trying to start to make that more of a focus on our project. So we're not just trying to do an inventory at the very end. We're trying to start that process in the schematic design and the early design phases so that we can actually, try to, 1, make a difference, but 2, also prove to ourselves that we are doing the right thing. Most of the structural engineers that I work with would say that they're always going to try to reduce the amount of material that they need in a building. And that's certainly true, right? Like you don't want to use more than you need. So even if you're using conventional concrete, there are ways to reduce the embodied carbon within a building. We just want to make sure that we are having those discussions up front and we're tracking the progress that we're making for the industry. So just kind of quickly, how are we stacking up? This is a handful of buildings. The green bars are really the operational carbon for specific codes. So you can see the Ontario Building Code, Tier 1 of the Ottawa High Performance Development Standard, Toronto Green Standard, Tier 1. That the next building is Courcelette. That's actually the one that you saw the geothermal drilling for. That's not where that's going to stand. That is an old energy model. That was when we had a massive snow melt on the drive aisle, which was going to be a huge hit. We ended up finding a way to reduce the grade of that of the drive aisle, so we don't need nearly as big of an area of snow melt. So presumably when we do our final energy model there, it'll be much smaller. It'll be more like the ones on the right. The other blue ones on the right are Stone Abbey. You can see there, that is the project that's under construction right now in Old Ottawa South, next to the Southminster Church, directly behind and kind of attached almost to the Southminster Church. And then the Baker project, which I'll talk about here in a second as well, is our development in Guelph. It's a pretty large scale development, 3 buildings there. So on the Stone Abbey project, I'll just point out a few of the features, the high performance features of the building. So one thing that we kind of got lucky with here, it worked well, but we were able to design what I consider to be a very aesthetically pleasing or beautiful building, but with a low window to wall ratio. We actually are only at about 20% across the board on the window to wall ratio. And so that was hugely beneficial for us. This building is geothermal heating and cooling. Our envelope is efficient. It's certainly better than code. It's not to say a passive house level certification or anything like that, but it is good. And I think between that and the low window to wall ratio, we were able to reduce our demand quite dramatically in the building early on. In addition to the geothermal heating and cooling, we do have very high efficiency ERVs for each of the suites in this building. This building is 6 stories. There's only 19 suites. They're quite large. Larger than I would say is typical for us or most other developers. And then there's also a townhome component on the right-hand side there. There's going to be 4 townhomes. Those are going to be following. So this is under construction now. We're expecting the first occupancy within the condo building this fall, I'll say. And it's kind of a staggered occupancy that'll take a couple of months. So that's one project. Another one I wanted to just mention is the Baker project. This one is fully endorsed as a global leader for One Planet Living. It is also on track to achieve zero carbon building standard through CAGBC version 3. So we're anticipating that. This is actually a project where we were not able to go with geothermal. There was lengthy discussions with the city of Guelph on that, and there was concern on their standpoint that it might interfere with the aquifer that is close by. And so at length, we really pushed. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out for this project. So on this one, we actually are using air source VRF. So we had to rely much more heavily on a highly efficient envelope in this building. I will say it was much trickier to figure out when we didn't have the geothermal to kind of fall back on, so to speak. But we are on track. We're anticipating construction start this fall on this project. As you can see, there's 2 towers that are similar in scale, 14 and 15 stories, and then a city library for the city of Guelph as well. This picture I put on the bottom here, I also wanted to just kind of highlight, some of the other features that we're looking at in our projects are not just the operational carbon of the building itself, but we're trying to think about the lifestyle of the users as well, the occupants at the end of the day. And this picture of a parking garage, well, I mean, there's some green in it, so it looks kind of pretty, but it's still a parking garage. But the point of it is we're looking at a micro-mobility scale for our projects. So we're partnering with a company that's not only going to be providing EV chargers, which is not anything new. I think most developers are doing that. I think most buildings are doing that as well. But we're also we're providing a few of the cars through a car share program, as well as electric scooters and electric bikes, so that the residents have ways to kind of get around. And we're looking at a partnership with them to look at it across our portfolio. So I'll just move to the next project where we'll be talking about it for this project as well. So this project is kind of the what's next for Windmill, at least for me. This will be my big focus for the next few years. Some of you may have seen this in the Ottawa building, the Ottawa Business Journal. This is our Parkway House development. It's over by the Lincoln Fields LRT station. Or future LRT station. It's right along the Parkway. there's an existing building there that is called the Parkway House Foundation. They provide healthcare services for adults that need basically 24/7 care. And we've made a partnership with them to develop on their land. So we'll build them a new facility, which will go in the ground floor of that 7-story building there. And then in addition to that, we're building a 28-story and a 16-story tower as well. So we're just finalizing the rezoning process with the city of Ottawa for this project before we can really move into the design process in earnest. But this project will, like all of our others, need to adhere to the One Planet Living principles. We will have to, we'll be looking for global endorsement through One Planet Living. We'll be looking at LEED Platinum for all of these buildings. We're anticipating geothermal here. We have the proposal in place. We're just working with them to try to understand basically the geology of the land in this part of Ottawa, but all signs look promising there. And we're, given the proximity to the Lincoln Field Station, it's about 600 meters where you have to take, a little jog down the pathway right next to the parkway and then across over to the LRT. So we'd be looking at doing that micro mobility there as well, so that, a resident can easily use an electric scooter and or walk or bike to get over to the LRT at the end of the day. Other things about this project in particular, we'll be looking, this is an early architectural rendering. There's a lot of glass on those towers. We'll probably be toning that glass down a little bit. In addition to that, the mid-rise building, we are anticipating that one for sure to be a CLT building or a mass timber building of some form. We may be looking at passive house certification for that, but we also don't want to get, we don't want to be trying to look at too many different frameworks, right? If we're looking at One Planet Living, if we're looking at LEED Platinum as well, we'll design with those other pieces in mind, but we may not need to, we're not trying to get 6 different certifications on any project. That's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of administrative costs. It's a lot of time and tracking all that. So we've got a lot on our plate and a lot of things to track already. So anyway, that was really just kind of a high level overview of Windmill and kind of our approach to what we're doing here. I know some of the other presenters are going to be diving into the details a bit more on, exactly what wall assemblies look like and that kind of thing. And my intention was to really keep this much more high level for just try to kick off the morning in a, a little bit more of a lighthearted mode. So with that, I'll just open it up to any questions that anybody has. I would love to say we are expecting higher rents, but that's not something that we're able to do. Like the increase that you can get from having a highly sustainable building is, I would say, marginal, at least in the Ottawa market. Like we can't say that just because we have a LEED Platinum building, we can charge, a lot more. It's a minuscule amount more. So I don't personally work on the finance side, so I'm not prepared to speak to all the specifics there. But what I can say is, we're certainly beholden to probably very much the same parameters that most other developers are in terms of, return on cost is probably not going to be any different. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into percentages necessarily, but what I will say is over the last few years, the construction market and the cost of construction has escalated dramatically, right? And that's true for all building types. So certain things have to change. So as an example, where we're looking at mass timber, I think a few years ago, that might have been seen as a much higher cost, starting cost, because it's just not as traditional of a building as say concrete is. But the cost of concrete have gone through the roof in the last few years. Cost of steel is coming down a bit. So, our projects are not substantially higher in cost, I don't think. I think as long as we're doing it early enough and we are designing in from that, from the early onset stage, I think that's the biggest kind of key takeaway I can provide, is making sure that these, that these design parameters are thought through at the very beginning. Yes, that's correct. But we're not outsourcing the entire mechanical. There's always just kind of a demarcation point, and that's in the geothermal room, usually in the basement. The biggest controversy is who owns the heat exchanger and which side are you demarking from. But yes, so we're often, everything that's in the ground up to the heat exchanger is owned by the geothermal provider. And then everything else, within our building, we're hiring a professional mechanical engineer to do everything in the building itself. And we have in-suite heat pumps, ERVs for all of our suites, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. With a low carbon approach, hopefully the utility bills will be substantially lower over time. And I would say, in addition to that, having not had any caffeine or coffee yet this morning, so my brain's not firing on all cylinders. I would say, as we're looking towards the future, we're trying to make sure that we're all meeting the same goals that the rest of the world is trying to meet in terms of, IPCC and the Paris Climate Accord, et cetera. And so we have to act. And so the long-term savings are really in making sure that we have a sustainable planet for generations and generations to come. In addition to the short-term savings being the lifetime that an occupant might be in the building, and it's really, at or below market rates in terms of utilities, and then providing a healthier building overall. Really this presentation was about carbon, but we're not just focused on that. Like, even with the measures that we're doing, such as mass timber, we want to expose as much of that as possible. We know that when we expose the mass timber, it has this biophilic effect. You really feel like you're in nature a little bit more. There was a study that I saw at the Wood Conference last week in Ottawa, where they did a study in a elementary school, and don't quote me on the numbers, but it was something like 1,800 beats over the course of the day that they studied the children's heart rates, and they were dramatically lower when they were in these exposed wood buildings versus a traditional building. So, I think there are other somewhat tangible, but also somewhat intangible effects there. Yeah, I guess there's a little bit more nuance to just like the behind the scenes in Windmill, like the Baker project, the Stone Abbey project as an example. It started at a much earlier time. We didn't have quite the exact same mandates that we had. It had a different set of parameters. Like, it's under construction now, but we actually started the process like 6 or 7 years ago for that building. And so it had a slightly different set of goals that we were trying to achieve there versus the Baker building, where we knew from the onset of winning that project with the city of Guelph that we were going for a zero carbon building. So we had to get to a certain milestone. So I think that's really the difference there. It's not necessarily that it's VRF in the Baker building. I guess the question are, what are the drivers for us? There are several, but the first one that comes to mind is where's the money coming from? Who's going to pay for it? If we are able to find a way to have the highly efficient HVAC system in a slightly less efficient envelope, because that moves the capital cost from one entity over to another, that's probably the approach that we're taking. That's not always going to be the case for everybody, and it depends on. I think it probably comes down to money more than anything. Now, the energy modeler in me, the professional engineer in me, would say we should reduce the demands first, and we're going to try to do that in every building. But I can say that we struggled a lot on the Baker project to find the right envelope system to work. There were a lot of late nights, a lot of hair being pulled out in the process, more so than we've had to do on other projects. So, but we also learned a lot, right? So we're trying to make sure that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Trying to learn from our process. That's why we're trying to standardize a lot more of our things, and that's a big key benefit as well. Any other questions? I would, from my knowledge, now keep in mind I've only been in Canada 4 years, but I think it's fairly common, certainly in the Toronto market. In Ottawa it is. I mean, we've got probably 3 projects here that we've drilled. So I would say it's common. There's a handful of players out there. I don't know what the rules are about, speaking to all the different names and whatnot. I'm happy to talk to you about that. Yes, it is competitive. Yeah, it's like we're not being sole sourced to just one entity by any means. All right. Well, thank you all.